up playing guitar in the early 2000s, you probably remember the short-lived height of Parker guitars and their famous Parker Fly. The Fly was built like a luxury sports car. Every nut and bolt was custom made. It had amazing curves, great handling, it's lightweight, sleek, and expensive. In 2001, the classic Fly retailed for $3,175, which is $5,315 in 2022 money. But this video is actually about the Fly's slightly less expensive and less sexy cousin, the Parker Nitefly. In 2001, the Nitefly retailed for $1,611, which is only $2,697 in 2022 money, and now you can get them used for as low as $1,000 in good condition. And for the price of anywhere between $900 and $1,700, the Parker Nitefly is by far the best super strat of all time. In this video, I'm going to tell you everything about the Parker Nitefly, and at the end I'm going to provide a brief buying guide that should help you purchase and even mod one of your own. But before we get into the fine details, I want to quickly mention a few features that make the Nitefly a better guitar for me personally, and later I'll go into each of those features in much greater detail. And this has nothing to do with price. I've also owned Flies. Number one is the neck. The Parker Fly has a very thin neck that is pretty similar to most modern guitars, and it's actually very comfortable. But I personally prefer something of a thicker neck, which the Nitefly has. More on that later. But the Fly does have the superior neck joint if you were wondering. Number two is the bridge. Now the Fly and the Nitefly have similar bridges in terms of functionality, but the Nitefly uses standard springs in the back, and the Parker Fly has a proprietary spring system that has to be fitted specifically for each string set. So if you play 9s, there's one spring you have to buy. If you play 10s, there's a different spring, and so on. Number three is the pickups. Because the Parker Fly is so thin, it has custom thin pickups that are now difficult to buy, which means if you don't like the stock pickups, you're going to have a very hard time changing them. And similarly, all of the electronics are soldered onto a circuit board within the Parker Fly, so you can't do much modding there either. The Nitefly, of course, has a pick guard, so you can buy replacements in any configuration for a decent price, which I've done on multiple guitars now. And number four is the horn stab in the chest. Because the Parker Fly is so thin and sleek, depending on your playing posture, the back of the horn may literally stab you in the chest while you play. The slightly thicker horn and body of the Nitefly provides a bit more comfort. Now, if you don't care about those 5 things, you'll probably like the Parker Fly more than the Nitefly. But for those of you who are with me and enjoy the Nitefly more, let's get into all of the fine details, starting now. Starting at the headstock, you'll see Spurzel locking tuners and a composite Graphtec style nut. And I don't know of any other companies that put either feature on production guitars in the 90s, yet both features are practically standard on high-end guitars today, which just shows how ahead of the time the Parker Nitefly was. Then we have the famous headstock design that allows for dramatic behind the nut bends. Now let's go to my first personal obsession. By the way, if you're finding this level of detail useful, give me a like so I know to make more gear videos like this one. Okay, my first obsession, guitar necks, and the Nitefly neck in particular. The neck is made from wood, but it has a carbon fiber fretboard and 22 stainless steel frets, 25.5-inch scale length, and a 10 to 13-inch compound radius. The back of the neck is coated with a very hard, smooth material that kind of reminds me like a nice piano. The playing experience of this neck is like nothing else. Your fingertips literally feel like fleece socks moonwalking on a freshly polished glass floor, if that makes sense. Point being, the smooth material on the back of the neck, combined with the smooth carbon fiber fretboard, the stainless steel frets, the whole thing is incomparably smooth and amazing to play. The neck shape is a C, and it's pretty much the same thickness throughout the length of the neck. It's also fairly thick compared to modern shredder guitars, thicker than a standard Kiesel neck, and slightly thicker than the Ibanez AZ series, but still not as thick as an old school Tele, for example. As I alluded to earlier, I personally can't play at the neck because my hands are both big and fatigue prone. For example, Ibanez Wizard necks, Kiesel, standard or thin necks, I even had an Aristides guitar. Though all of those guitars are great, but the necks are too thin for me and they cause me hand pain within about 60 to 90 minutes. The thicker neck of the Parker Nitefly is perfect for me, and I've played it for over 5 hours without any pain whatsoever. And the Nitefly also has the truss rod, where it should be on every guitar, at the very bottom of the instrument. There's also a slight carve at the heel joint, which makes upper fret access pretty good. The stainless steel frets on every Nitefly I've ever played were perfect, despite being at least 2 decades old. You can also set the action pretty low without any issue. And I've also never owned a Nitefly that required any neck adjustments ever whatsoever. All of my guitars stay in this basement in New Jersey from winter to summer, and I never have to adjust any of them at all. In fact, I frequently go over a week without even touching the tuners, and they just simply stay in tune. That's while also using the bridge. So simply put, the Parker Nitefly neck is the most stable neck I've ever played, along with VGA guitars, which are the only other guitars I put in this quality, this high caliber of quality, at least ones that I've tried so far that have necks that I can play. Okay, so the Nitefly body is admittedly polarizing. That being said, I personally think it looks pretty cool. If you look closely, you'll see that the upper horn, the lower horn, and the headstock all match in shape. And the lower horn and lower bout match the outline of my logo. That was on purpose. By the way, if you go over to andreflood.com and look through my site, you can play a game I like to call Spot All of the Parker Guitars. I like to put it as many places as possible throughout my life. As you look around the guitar, you can see all the ways it conforms to your body, which makes it very comfortable. However, the forearm contour isn't overly sculpted. Now, I'm not picking on any brands because the super sculpted forearm contour appears to be an industry-wide trend right now. But I happen to have a VJ guitar next to me, which is an amazing guitar, but I can't play it because of how sculpted the forearm contour is. In addition to having large, fragile hands, I also have obnoxiously long arms. So when I play, I like my forearm to have a smooth, but still substantial ledge to rest on, so that my hand can be in the right position while seated. That keeps the weight off of my shoulder while giving me the ability to adjust where and how I pick. When I play most other modern guitars, the contour is so steep that my arm slides off. As a result, I have to sit with a flexed shoulder as I practice, which is a terrible posture for long-term playing. Anyway, my point is that this body and this contour is perfect, and it always has been. While we're discussing the body, I should also show you inside the Nitefly. Unlike many other guitars that come routed for one pickup configuration, the Parker Nitefly is completely routed all the way through. And so you can install any pickups into it without modding the body, which is a great feature. I actually mod all of my Parker Niteflys as soon as I get them. And if you want to see a video that talks about my #1 Parker Nitefly and the mods I did on it, the pickups, etc., I have a video on that as well. Okay, so now we should talk about the stock pickups that come with the guitar. They're pretty damn good. The most popular configuration throughout the years for the Nitefly was SSH, and they usually had DiMarzios. A few models had humbucker, Seymour Duncans. But the DiMarzios and this configuration is pretty much the standard. Now, if I was a fan of SSH configurations, I'd probably keep these stock pickups. But like everyone else, I like to take part in the endless journey of pickup discovery. And if you're interested in my absolute favorite pickups, I have a video on that as well, and they're installed in my all-time favorite Parker guitar. Okay, so let's hear some of the stock DiMarzio pickup tones. As you heard, the stock DiMarzios are actually very versatile and they sound pretty awesome. And as a side note, these stock knobs are actually really cool and really smooth. They grip your finger nicely. I don't know what makes them so awesome, but they just kind of are. In addition to the magnetic pickups, the Nitefly also has a Piezo system powered by a 9-volt battery in the back. My preferred Nitefly ears have a push button that gives you the ability to turn the Piezo on and off so that you don't waste your battery when you're not using it. Then there's a 3-way switch that allows you to select magnetic pickups only, magnetic and Piezo, or just Piezo. Finally, you can use a stereo cable to split the signal, so you can send the Piezo signal to an acoustic amp, for example, or a PA system, and then you can send the magnetic pickups to a different system like a regular electric guitar amp. Or if you run a standard cable in, both signals go to 1 amp. So here are some more tones with the Piezo and the magnetic pickups. Okay, so now we're on to my second area of obsession within guitars, and that is bridges. The Nitefly has one of the best bridges of all time along with the Fly. So here's how the Nitefly bridge works. The bridge sits on 2 completely self-contained posts that don't require any maintenance. So there's no knife edge that will eventually wear out, which is awesome. Each post can be raised or lowered from the back of the guitar to control the string action, and it uses standard springs in the back like most other guitars. The cool thing about the way the posts work is that you don't have to loosen the strings to change the action, and they won't wear out if you change the action while the guitar is fully set up. So that's really awesome. But here is the game-changing feature. There's a third adjustable Allen wrench post in the back that gives you control over how far the bridge moves backward. So for example, you can set the bridge to bend down only, or you can set it to floating like a Floyd Rose. But there's more. Since you can adjust the exact location of that third screw in the back, you can decide exactly how far back you want the bridge to pull up, which gives you the ability to tune your pull-up note. So let's say you want to pull up to just a half step, you can tune it that way. If you want to pull up to a minor third, you can pull up that way, so on and so forth. That's a feature I've not found on any other bridge thus far, and it's one reason why I need this bridge and why I need this guitar. If you watched any of my other videos, you probably know I like to have the Whammy Bar in my hand at all times. And the way I use it, this guitar stays perfectly in tune all the time. I go weeks on end without even touching the tuners. I'm serious about that. Now, in the last example, I was using the bridge how I generally use it, which is fairly subtly. But just for fun, let's see how much abuse the bridge can take while staying in tune. Another thing I love about this bridge is that the Whammy Bar doesn't have any knurls. It just pushes in and pulls out fairly easily. And there's another screw on the back that can adjust how tight you want that to be. So you can push the Whammy Bar in, lock that screw down really tight and have it very stiff, or you can loosen it up and have it just flow wherever you want it. The last thing I love about this bridge is that the strings are top loaded instead of through the body. What that means is that you load the strings through the back of the bridge instead of through the back of the guitar, like most other guitars. I like to change my strings a lot, especially in the summer when it's hot and I'm sweating. Sometimes I change my strings once a week, and having them top loaded makes string changes very, very quick and very, very easy. I also like to use very, very light strings. I use 8s, and when you have 8s plus a top loaded bridge, they're even more slinky because it's not taking any tension, any extra tension to go through the body and then up the neck. So top loaded bridge, super light strings for me personally. I've never played a guitar that is as easy to play as this one in terms of how the strings feel. Of course, if that's not for you, you can always play thicker strings, and that's cool too. Something I've been thinking about fairly recently is the fact that Floyd Rose style double locking systems are far less common today than they were in the 80s. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe many companies were using floating bridges without a locking nut in the 90s. Yes, it's pretty common today. In fact, it's kind of the norm today. You see it on Ibanez, you see it on John Petrucci's signature model guitar or Guthrie Govan's signature model guitar, so on and so forth. But in the 90s, this just wasn't really a thing. And I think Ken Parker and perhaps also Ned Steinberger were on the cutting edge of that idea. And now we're going to talk about some tips for buying a Parker Nitefly. The first thing you need to understand is that Parker guitars have a cult-like following. You may not know anyone who actually owns one, well, besides me, but good deals go very, very quickly on Reverb, so you have to stay vigilant. And also shout out to the Fly Clone Forum and Dr. VJ Monzo, who runs the forum. You can find out just about anything you need to know there about Parker Fly guitars or about Fly guitars. So we need to start with the serial number because that is what will determine a lot about the guitar. There are 5 to 6 digits, and the first 1 or 2 digits are the month. The next single digit is the last number of the year it was produced, and the last digits are the number of the guitar that month. Not as important as the first 3 digits. The Nitefly V1 and V2 were produced from 11/1996 to 2/1998. These guitars are different than all future Niteflys because they have a passive Piezo system that requires a separate mixer to use properly. You can send each signal to a separate amp with a Y cable, but if you use a mono cable, you can only get the electric guitar sound. Parker also sold a separate Nite mix to use with these guitars. Nitefly V3 and V4 were from 11/1996 to 2/1998. They were basically the same as V1 and V2, but they had the mixer built in. I personally wouldn't buy Nitefly V1 or V2 unless you really don't care about the Piezo system. But the V3 and the V4 are great guitars, and they actually have a slightly thicker body. This one is actually one of them, so the body is a bit thicker than my other Niteflys. So if you prefer a guitar with a thicker body or a heavier guitar, I think this one is about 8 pounds. Then you're going to want to go with a Nitefly V3 or V4. Now, the Niteflys V5 through 8 were made between 4/1998 and 12/1999, and they are my personal favorite. They're pretty much the same as V3 and V4, but the body is thinner and lighter. And since I personally like a lighter, sleeker guitar, I try to find one of these whenever I can. But again, the V3 and the V4, these are also great, so don't skimp on these. Okay, so from 12/1999 forward, we get into a bit of a gray area from my knowledge base. And these were also the last models that were made. There was a group that was made from 1999 to 2001, and then 2001 until the company was ended. And, you know, they're all fairly similar. And if you look around, you'll see that some of these guitars don't have the stereo mono button, and some do. For example, this is one of those guitars, and as you can see, no stereo mono button, right? And for me personally, that is a big issue. Without this stereo mono button, whenever you have your guitar plugged into the input jack, whenever you have a cable in the jack, your battery is being drained, even if you're not using the Piezo system. So that means you can't just leave your guitar on a stand with the cable in, otherwise you're draining your battery. Also, if your 9-volt battery dies, you don't have magnetic sound either. With all of the other models that have the stereo mono button, you press the button to engage the Piezo system, so if your battery dies and you turn the Piezo system off, it's completely out of the signal and you're not draining battery, and you can still use your magnetic pickup sound. So the ones with the stereo mono button, no matter what version it is, if it has that button, you know that you can take your battery completely out and the guitar will still function with the magnetic pickups. If it doesn't have that button, that means that if you don't have a 9-volt battery in, the guitar won't function at all, not even the magnetic sound. So I'm not exactly sure why some models in that time period have the button and some don't. But when I'm buying a Parker now, I just take a close look at the pick guard when I'm purchasing to make sure it has one of those buttons. And for me personally, I like to make sure that the year is such that the body is nice and thin. You'll also notice that the Niteflys without the mono button usually have a slightly different saddle, okay? So, as you can see here, these saddles are fairly straight, nothing really on them. These saddles are just flat metal, and the saddles before that had these ball bearings in them. I personally like the ball bearings, but I did have exactly one Nitefly that came with a bad saddle, and I spent months trying to replace the ball bearings, trying to get a replacement saddle, and I just couldn't ever get that saddle to sound right. It can be an issue if you have a bad saddle, but if the saddles are fine when you get the guitar and you take care of it, it should be totally fine, and I don't think it's a major concern. With all of that said, of course, all Parker Niteflys are going to be used because they don't make these guitars anymore. And so if you are going to go out and buy a Parker Nitefly and you get it home and you think it's the one you want, there are a few things you should check right away while you can do the return process if need be before that time period runs out. The first thing you're going to want to do is to check to make sure you can play each string up and down the neck and nothing sounds metallic-y or buzzy or weird. If you're getting a weird metallic-y, buzzy plinking sound, check your saddles, and if that string that's causing the sound has a saddle that looks a little bit off, a little bit different, the balls aren't perfect, I say immediately return that particular guitar, because that means the saddle is bad. You're not going to find any of these saddles used. You're probably going to have a really difficult time replacing it. And if you want to replace that one saddle, you're going to have to replace all of them. But we'll talk about replacing saddles a little bit later. So the first thing you want to do, check to make sure all the saddles are functioning and good. Number 2 is to check to make sure all of the frets are normal, just like you would on any other guitar. Of course, these frets are actually glued on, and so you want to make sure that none of them are falling off or anything like that. I've seen on forums people talk about their frets falling out, but I personally never experienced that. So just give it a quick look, make sure the frets are good. Next, you're going to plug the guitar in, of course, and make sure the Piezo system works. Make sure that each string sounds good with the Piezo system. That's super important, of course. And then finally, you should check to make sure the truss rod works. And then you should be good. Now, to be completely honest, this very Parker Nitefly right here, I don't believe the truss rod works in this. It doesn't seem to be doing anything. It has a lot of wear and tear on the side of the neck, right? A lot of this paint is completely chipped off, and this guitar still works amazingly well. It stays in tune. The action's very low. I have no issues on it whatsoever, and that's despite all of these flaws. So even if you find a Parker online that isn't exactly perfect from an aesthetic perspective, from the way it looks, it still might actually be an amazing guitar that works well. And finally, we're on to the last section of this video, and that is modding. The most common mod is of course going to be a pickup change. And as the time of this video, you can purchase new custom pick guards from WD Parts in a variety of colors and customizations and so on and so forth. I've used them many times now and they deliver pretty fast, usually within a week or so. If for some reason you want to replace your saddles, as of the time of making this video, Graphtec does still sell replacement Piezo saddles and preamps for the Parker Nitefly. I've purchased them in the past to use with a different Parker Nitefly, the Southern Nitefly, which is a Telly looking Parker. I regret selling that. But point being, I replaced the saddles on that particular Nitefly and it all worked perfectly fine. And again, that was from Graphtec. Now, if you're a crazy person, if you're an absolute maniac like me, and you wanted to buy a Nitefly specifically so that you can harvest the neck from the guitar to put on a different guitar, that is not the best idea, and here's why. If you look carefully at the Parker Nitefly neck, you'll see that the back of the neck is rounded in a special way. And if you look at the body of the Parker Nitefly, you'll see that the body is also rounded in a special way. What this means is that you cannot take a standard Fender neck and put it in a Nitefly body, and you can't take a standard Fender body and put a Nitefly neck on it. You'll need to have a special way of routing or rerouting that body so that it will accept the Nitefly neck. I don't think anyone would be trying to do that, but that's something that I tried, and as a result, I was upset when I did that. Okay, with that being said, that is everything I know about Parker Nitefly guitars. If you have any additional questions, be sure to leave them below. If you need pickup recommendations and you want to know my favorite pickups, the ones that are in my favorite Parker Nitefly guitar, I have a video on that you can watch next. Or if you want to know about my #1 Parker Nitefly guitar, all of the mods, why I love it so much, you can watch that video as well. And by the way, I'm Andre Flood, and I'll talk to you soon.